Do you believe that God wants you healthy? Then join me, Cersei Blue and Gigi Carter on the Healthy for My Purpose podcast, where we help you realize the relationship between your health and your purpose. We share how eating like Daniel can revolutionize your life. Through discussions and interviews, we challenge you to discover the powerful connection between plant-based nutrition, your body, and your faith. It's time. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Healthy for My Purpose podcast. We are so excited about the conversation we are going to be talking about today. We are going to be exploring Black women, weight loss, faith, health, the whole shebang. We have the wonderful, the brilliant, the beautiful Dr. Althea Joseph, and she's going to be talking to us about some of the research that she did, some of the knowledge she has in this area, and we think that you are going to really enjoy it. So without further ado, welcome, Dr. Joseph.
Thank you.
First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the research. Tell us a little bit about your background with health, why you kind of chose the path you did for your PhD, exploring Black women in weight loss and faith. Just give us a little bit about a history of what brought you here.
Sure, thank you. So I am currently a professor at Oakwood University. I'm also a registered dietitian nutritionist, been practicing for nearly 20 years now. I've always had a passion for weight maintenance in general, and especially with Black women and women of color, because we are not represented well in the literature. So that is my passion and my focus, and anything related to that, I just like to research more about.
All right, so let's dive in. Can you share how your research kind of explored this intersection between faith and weight loss for Black women? What were some of your key findings? Just kind of give us, a process on how you kind of came to the study, what you kind of found out, and what relevant factors can you pull out for us today?
Sure. So historically, Black women, African American women, they have a strong religious influence, and the church plays a huge part in their upbringing. So with that, normally at church functions, there's a lot of food there at potlucks, weddings, prayer meeting, whatever it is. And with Black women, we have the highest prevalence of obesity. So I wanted to address the fact, well, let's look at it from a religious perspective, if there is any relationship between obesity and religious activities among Black women. So that was an interest peak for me. And during my study, I recruited participants in the Northern Alabama area. Participants had to be at least over 19 years of age. And we did have a few participants that came, but, limitations of the study were, work schedules, which didn't increase some of our numbers. But what I found that there was no correlation related. However, I believe if maybe more participants were involved in the study, we could have seen a greater correlation as well, too. And then we also didn't account for religious preferences. There's different denominations that may eat differently as well, too.
Yeah. So how many people did you end up in the actual study?
30. We had 30, actually 31 participants. Yes.
Okay. And you said they were over 19. What was the range of ages?
So it was 19 all the way up, I believe, to 76.
Oh, wow. That's a huge range.
Yes. So
Great.
the majority of our participants were young women, which was great because normally in studies we see normally older African American women. Mm-hmm. So to have the younger participants was really exciting. So when I do future research, we'll expand it a little bit more and maybe have the window open more so we can get more younger people involved because we want to hear from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would walk us through the actual study? You recruited the participants. Then what happened after that?
Okay, so when I recruited the participants, they obviously had to sign a release that they were willing to do the study, and everything was confidential. So I took their height and weight to determine BMI, and then we asked a few questions about their religious activity. There was a questionnaire that we used. It was actually called the Durrell scale, which is a validated instrument that has been used in surveys for many, many years. So with that, it wasn't very long. And then from that, we were able to put the information into our statistical software package and then run our correlation from there.
Mhm.
And while we were doing the study, I thought it interesting because women, after they were finishing answering the questionnaire, they would just kind of congregate together
Mhm.
and start speaking amongst themselves about what their health, their weight, and these women didn't know each other. But it was interesting because they found a safe space where they were able to speak and discuss some of the concerns that they had, and some of them not even realizing that, per the BMI, that they were overweight or considered obese, because they really didn't have that knowledge, or some maybe just never followed up with their practitioner, but many thought that they were okay.
Yeah.
But the number said something different.
Right. And I think a lot of times we think we're okay because the people around us look like us. And so we just assume that we're all okay because we all look alike, in terms of our body mass and our weight and our maybe our nutrition habits and lifestyle. How long was the study? Like, was it just like they came in the one time, or was it over the course of different weeks or?
So yes, it was just one time that they came in.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So is to expand your study, because I'm like so interested in this topic. So I'm like already trying to figure out how to get you some grant money.
I would love that.
So if anybody listening, you have some grant money to throw around, or of some grant money, please let us know. But what would be the ideal scenario for you as far as the next step with this type of study?
So that's a great question. I would love to bring the participants in and to have them answer a food frequency questionnaire that would have foods that are culturally relevant to them, because some of the food frequency questionnaires, they may not be familiar with some of those items, or their items that they consume may not be on it. So that's what I would like to do, just to assess their calories, protein, fiber, different vitamins and minerals intake, and then possibly even shifting where I could bring some of the participants and community even into a cooking class at a local community center, which would be geared around their cuisine. So making foods healthier, maybe a different approach to what they are normally consuming. So if they're consuming a lot of saturated fat, maybe we can tweak it a little bit to make it a little different for them, but still honoring their preferences, but just showing it a different way. So I haven't quite figured out which direction, but those are some future ideas to do research in for the community.
Yeah. So what are some of the unique, I guess, challenges or things about Black women that you see when it comes around weight loss? Because I know you mentioned in the beginning of the podcast that Black women have the highest rates of obesity. What is playing into that, do you feel? What's the cause of that? Or what are some of the factors or the challenges that Black women face that put them at the top of that obesity chart?
We have to look at their environment, their social determinants of health, where they're living, where they live, where they eat, they play. All different factors can involve into that. Do they have resources to go for walks? Are there gyms accessible? There's just a lot of different things. Grocery stores, what type of grocery stores foods are available, and their work schedule, their work life. Are we menu planning? There's just a whole lot. It's just not one piece. You have to really look at the individual holistically to determine what are some of the factors that can be causing that.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier, and it popped in my head because I translated it to my own family. When you said the study that you did, people didn't realize that they had obesity or were considered overweight based on BMI. I wonder, because like when I go home to like I live in Washington, but when I travel to Cleveland to go visit my family, everybody is overweight or has obesity. And I walk in there like the oddball. And, I wonder if one of the other barriers is just lack of awareness that they even, that there is an issue with weight. I can remember when I first moved into this space, an African American gentleman who lives here. We don't have a lot of Black people on the island, so it's like my husband and I and like two other people. And there's one gentleman who kind of knew what I was doing, and he doesn't live. I don't know if he lives here full time or just part time, but he said that, or he was under the impression that BMI was not an accurate measure of health for African Americans, period. And it caused me to pause and think, and I'm going through my head because, what comes to mind for me when I hear a statement like that is either there's two things at play. There's either one, he's saying he didn't say this but this is what came to mind, is body composition is, I think, really important because you have like a football player who has low fat mass, high muscle mass, and so their BMI is going to be high, but technically they're healthy, right? Whereas you could have someone with a normal BMI but a high amount of visceral fat or low muscle mass that could be more unhealthy than someone with a higher BMI like the football player. Now I know these are kind of like exceptions to the general rule of the population, but I just wonder if one of the barriers is this kind of self-acceptance or notion that we're just big people, this is just how we're built. Now, I argue that because, I go back and I look at historical photos, like during the Malcolm X days and Martin Luther King Jr. days, and you're looking at the general population of pictures during the civil rights movement, and people are walking and marching. And these are all, you can just visually look at them and see that the majority of the people that are, in those historical photos look to be of a normal weight compared to today. So would you say that maybe one of the other barriers is just this either lack of knowledge or lack of acceptance of the status with which we're in today in terms of obesity rates?
That could very well be so. As you mentioned, back in the days when you mentioned, we were more active. Now we're more sedentary. We drive everywhere. We're not as physically active. The foods that we eat are very processed. But there is controversy with the BMI now. It doesn't take into fact certain factors. I mean, you can have an athlete who's considered obese, but not really, because the BMI, it's a quick measure. You're just looking at height and weight. And it's easy when you go into provider's office, they're able to calculate it. You put those numbers in and boom, you have your number. But hopefully they'll get other tools that can be used in the offices that will be a more reliable measure to determine that, so individuals can have a little bit more accurate information. For example, the BMI charts for those women for Asia, it's different. The numbers are different than it is here. So we're built differently. You have to look at different factors as well. So there is controversy about, is really BMI that accurate way to determine obesity?
Yeah, I mean, I would think at it. I love what you said about you have to look at kind of the individual to kind of see, because what can be very harmful, I think, is if we're saying, well, this is just how we're built, but it's just how we look today. It's not necessarily how we're quote unquote designed to be. And then we ignore it. And then all the health issues that are associated with carrying excessive fat, like high increased risk of cancers, high blood pressure, elevated A1C and all of that. You kind of ignore the weight part of it because, there's this social acceptance of we're just big people. And I think that's the biggest danger.
And that's where, following up with your physician routinely, getting your labs done, so you're able to assess, your hemoglobin A1Cs, your cholesterol level, your sodium levels, to see where you are, to get your lab work as well. In addition to, is your weight trending to go up? Or is it going down in your physical activity? Just really looking at the individual holistically and getting that package to determine what's best for them, so they could take steps to have their optimal health that they choose that's going to be best for them.
So what do you think the messaging should be in terms of health promotion to Black women in the Black community? And you could weave in, how do you feel that messaging could come in when it comes to faith or any other factors that are important to Black women? How would that look different, or how would that look?
I think they need to see more of people that look like them, so they can relate to them. Not necessarily people that look like them, maybe just not what we see in the magazines of how a model looks, but being healthy, being exercising, having walking with your family, having a picnic, having your devotional, your spiritual life, just having it balanced and whole, but really seeing more people that look like them so they can relate to that.
Yeah, I think there was a study, you probably know about this, that if you are around people, like if you're around people who have obesity, you're like 60 or 70% more inclined to have it as well, or some statistic like that. I can't remember. But I think that, it goes back to, kind of your behavior, what's driving the choices that you make every day, like what's driving those behaviors. And, if you grow up in a house like I did, where physical activity wasn't necessarily, now my dad was an athlete, like back in the old days, in his young days, and my parents their age, they have a pretty big age difference, but I didn't grow up in a household where sports and activities and, going for walks was kind of normal. It was just, I played as a child outside, I was one of those who would leave my house, like in the summer, leave at like 11 in the morning and not come back until the street lights came on. But, and who knows what I was up to, but I'm going off a tangent here, but if you're in an environment where it's normal to just sit around and talk or watch TV and not move, you're more inclined to, maintain those behaviors. So yeah, I think seeing people who do something different from that, I think would definitely help to move the needle. But it does come back to, I think, who you surround yourself with. I think choosing your friends is one of the most important things you can do. You can't choose your family. Your family's your family. You just have to live with it, for better or for worse. And so, but who you choose to surround yourself with, I think there has to be a conscious choice around, understanding that when I surround myself with people who sit around and drink beer all day, I'm likely going to assimilate and do that behavior. Whereas if I consciously choose to be around people who are, moving, one of my favorite groups is Black Girls Run, you're surrounding yourself with other Black women who are moving every day. Like they meet up and they do, 2 miles, 3 miles, 6 miles together. A lot of times it's walking, sometimes it's running, sometimes it's run walking, whatever it is, but they're moving. And I think when you start to expand your circle to include people who are on the same path as you, you're just setting yourself up for success over the long term if you're, if you're trying to change your lifestyle behaviors.
Right, because we need a support team, especially as women. It'd be nice to have someone that you could pick up and, call on the phone. Hey, let's go for a walk. Let's meet up. We're women. We like to bond. We like to talk, and having that is important. And that's why a lot of the research, they use the church as a place to draw participants, just because of the historic background of that. And if we're able to get into the church and provide health educators that look like us and who could relate to us, and send that information into the community, hopefully we can see more results, because we need to be we want them to be receptive of the information that we provide to them. So it's very important to establish that trust and relationship, so we can inform the community and get those walking groups or those running groups and those cooking groups together, where we can bond more and tend to just spread it throughout the community and associate with people who have the same interest like us, once we're educated and given that information too.
Yeah, I think, the church at large, and if we're just specifically even talking about the Black church where a lot of Black women congregate, there's a missed opportunity. We're talking about the civil rights movement, how the church was like the leader in that, but we are in a health crisis, and the church actually has an opportunity to now step up and be a leader in this epidemic, right? Because I'm just envisioning that if Black churches in general just had that activism of health already built in the system of it, what change that can impact the community at large, right? Because you're going to be coming in naturally for spiritual health, but you're going to walk away with much more. You're going to walk away with physical health. You're going to walk away with an ideology that being healthy is a spiritual practice. That's something that can transform the trajectory of your health forever, because now you've made this alignment that you never made before. And so I'm excited about the potential that the church has to really impact the epidemic that we're in health, especially for Black women. And so I appreciate all the work that you're doing, Dr. Joseph. You're a leader in spreading that message to the churches. But I'm going to just pivot just a little bit, because, for the Black women that may be listening to this podcast, I've had so many conversations, and I think this is a cultural thing that I want us to kind of speak to, is body image. And I think when we talk about Black women and body image, it's unique to our own community. And so the skinny that, was the ideal maybe when we were growing up, I don't even know what it was or what, has changed, where being more full, being more voluptuous, even in social media and all of the images that are now kind of moving in that direction. I'm not sure how to really say it, but Black women, I was talking to Black women, they're like, oh yeah, I want to lose weight, but I want to make sure I don't lose my butt, or I want to make sure I don't lose my curves. And so there's a different way that we see body image. How do we integrate a healthy body image culturally, but still weave in this healthy weight, reducing disease, and all of the other stuff, when there is this messaging around our body image that's unique to us?
Sure. I think we have to, first of all, be confident in ourselves and not to look at others. Confidence is going to have to stem from within, because I think that throughout the years, it's been taken away, even, just how our body's proportion, even our hair. We were, told to do something different. You have to be confident with who you are. Have that first. And that's why, as Gigi mentioned, having that support group, having your sisters, people that can back you up and show you love and support. And it's a lifestyle change. So if you do want to lose some weight and change the way you look, just love yourself first. and take one step at a time. Look to see what you can change differently in your diet, your lifestyle, that's going to make you feel whole and well. Because at the end of the day, you want to feel happy and to love yourself, and forget about what everybody says and how they look. This is how you are, and embrace yourself and love yourself.
I love that, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's so true. I think the be confident in who you are is really the takeaway, because I mean, from a biblical perspective, and Cersei can help me with the scripture, but you know, God made us into who we are today, and so we have to acknowledge that he loves us exactly the way we are, and we were designed the way we are. And so, really accepting that and taking that to heart and having that confidence in who you are is so important, just in terms of having that identity in Christ, but also how your identity drives your day-to-day behaviors, right? Because when you really embrace that and take it to heart, I'll say, in Cersei, we've had this conversation before about exercise and the hair politics, as you would put. We could get into that if you want. I don't know if you want to go down that path, but I think when I was living in Mississippi, that's how I learned about Black Girls Run. I was a part of the Jackson, Mississippi Black Girls Run group, and one of the things that I learned from the person who was kind of the president of that chapter was, she said, the biggest hurdle to Black women getting healthy is hair, and that Black women don't want to get sweaty, because they spend a lot of time and money to get their hair, relaxed and, styled. And I've got that biracial hair, so I just keep mine in a ponytail forever. It's like Cersei like hardly ever sees me without a ponytail, because it'll be like this soft frizzy afro, but I just kind of do this because it's easy. But I think that where was I going with this? Yeah, so that hair is one of the biggest obstacles, according to this person, as to why Black women don't work out or get healthy. Have you seen any data around that in your research or in your review of the literature at all?
Well, just speaking with other women, other Black women, that's been a concern. They choose to wear their hair in different ways, maybe braids, maybe their natural state, or maybe just a press, a blowout sometimes. But at the end of the day, it comes to, what do you value?
Mm-hmm.
Are you okay if that straightened hair gets a little puffed, where your natural beauty curls come out? Are you going to be okay with that? So it's really an individual choice of how they want to approach that. But it is a concern. It is a concern. There's different ways I think you can go around it, putting a scarf on, tying it down. But I believe that shouldn't be an obstacle of, preventing you from doing physical activity. And no one says you have to go run a marathon. It could just be even hiking, doing some gardening, walking, whatever, cycling, whatever it is. At least your heart rate is up and you're moving and you're getting the vitamin D, sunlight, fresh air.
Yeah, indeed. It should not be. And I think now they're actually marketing to Black women, like they're selling, like you said, the scarves and the bands, as opposed to quote unquote keep your hair non-sweaty. Yeah. But just in terms of the faith piece, how do you find that when women start to connect their faith to their health? Have you seen anything that shows that improves the way that they approach their health? Or is there any data that you've reached, even just working with the women, or in the research, or just in general?
Well, in the scripture, the Bible indicates, your body's a temple of God. and you shouldn't defile that. So those who are into health and wanting to grow closer with Christ, they're going to be more aware, more have cognitive awareness of what they're putting in their body, their daily intake, their lifestyle. So that will connect your faith, grow you stronger with Christ.
Yeah, I also think too, and I know you mentioned it before, that you're hoping when you do the study again that the food piece will be more culturally appropriate. Let's talk a little bit about the cultural piece of the food, because I find, family gatherings, there's this nostalgic idea that we're attached to the foods of our culture, or what grandma used to cook and growing up. And sometimes people feel like changing the way that they're cooking the food is somehow pulling them away from that. Talk about how we can kind of keep the good and release the bad as a way of kind of coming to terms with that. It's not about throwing the entire baby out with the bathwater, but maybe making some adjustments to what it looks like. Because Gigi and I, when we do the Healthy Christian Women Boot Camp, we have a day that talks about breaking generational patterns of poor health. And one of the things that we found a lot of the women spoke about is that they just felt like certain diseases just ran in their family. It was a sense of acceptance to it, almost a rite of passage. I know for myself, because high blood pressure was in my family, I just automatically assumed I was going to get it. I didn't even feel like there was this control of me changing. And so speak to this idea of, one, how we can culturally keep our culture in the food, or maybe focus on different aspects, and also too on this idea of buying into what runs into our family, which is disempowering, rather than seeing how we can make active changes and actually change the course of generational health.
Sure. So when it comes to food, for example, if you have what they know known as greens, many times people will use like maybe pork or some type of fat to put in there, but just choosing a different option. Maybe you can go with turkey, or maybe flavoring it or season it differently, because the idea is not to take away the foods. You definitely don't want to do that. That's who we are. That's a part of our culture. You don't want to take that away, but just tweaking them to make them healthier. So if we're going to have maybe if fried chicken is normally on our menu every Sunday, maybe we can do baked. Or maybe instead of using salt all the time, maybe we can use some different herbs or seasoning to get that flavor out, because we still want to make the food taste good, right? There's just different ways that we can, when presented, if we're doing like our, our sweet potatoes. I've had it, instead of sugar, I've had it done with agave before. Just introducing those concepts slowly, little by little, so you can incorporate healthier dietary habits in your life. And when it comes to, drinks, sugary drinks, maybe diluting it a little bit more with water. Just different opportunities. We don't do everything overnight, but just letting the community be aware and knowing that you can still enjoy your foods. But let's see how we can make them healthier, because greens are great. We don't want to take those out, but maybe instead of, like I mentioned, having the pork, choosing a different option to flavor it instead, right? Because that we're gonna increase saturated fat into that meal right there, where we can look at different alternatives.
Yeah, smoked paprika is our seasoning of choice for greens. Yeah, it's interesting because the whole cultural food argument or debate or conversation, I think, when I think about it on a day-to-day basis, I'm a little skeptical of it, because most people don't make home cooking like meals except around the holidays. Like these foods that we're talking about, like sweet potato casserole, like we used to do it with the marshmallows and brown sugar in it. And, now sweet potatoes are sweet enough for me just by themselves. I don't need to put anything on them. But, I just think if it's overplayed or overblown, and I'm being a little bit of a critic here, because, day to day, people are going through the drive-through at Chick-fil-A. Day to day, people are ordering pizzas. day to day, people are getting that, packaged frozen dinner from the grocery store, the Marie Calendar, whatever frozen on. I know I'm naming names. I probably shouldn't, but that's the day to day, and that really has nothing to do with culture. So I kind of feel like sometimes that is a little bit of an excuse. And I know we still have to be sensitive because it's not politically correct to call people out like that. but the truth, but the reality is that people are not making home cooked, culturally sensitive foods day to day. And I think that's where the damage is. It's the damage is, going to the gas station, grabbing that sausage biscuit with eggs and bacon, and a 64-ounce, Pepsi to wash it down. That's the damage, the day-to-day damage that people are doing. That has nothing to do with your heritage or your culture, other than just adopting bad habits that you learned from your parents and whatnot. So I feel like sometimes we do a little bit of a disservice by being a little too soft on that topic. Not a popular thing to say, but I'm just kind of putting it out there because that's what goes through my head sometimes when I hear that. But I do know, I recognize that, for people who do home cooked meals day to day, every day, and they're making that, then I would say that argument absolutely carries more weight. Your thoughts?
I think, yeah, I agree. I think we're so busy now. We're so busy. We don't have time to come home and cook and to have a home cooked meal because you have to take the kids here, or you may have two jobs. You just have to be realistic. And what's in our environment? What is in our neighborhood? I mean, what is it? It's close to go to fast food and pick something up, but it takes time. And when I've counseled my patients, clients in the past, we take steps. I always say, well, out of one day of the week, what can you create? Menu plan, menu. I mean, what do you normally eat? Mm-hmm. And then we'll make a calendar, and then we'll say, okay, Tuesdays, we're going to have chicken and rice or spaghetti, whatever it is. Every Tuesday, that's what you're going to have. So when you go to the grocery store, you're going to plan. And before you know it, you're going to see your calendar full and you're going to be like, wow, and then you're going to see yourself going out to eat less. But it takes time. It's a lifestyle change. It doesn't happen overnight. And for some, it can happen quickly. And for others, it may take a little bit longer. But just even when you go to the grocery store, having a list, okay, so what healthy snacks am I going to plan? Am I going to necessarily pick up that extra bag of chips? What can I substitute that with? Or let me have some grapes with my snacks, some apples. It depends. It's going to look different for everyone, but it's a lifestyle change, and it takes initiative and determination. And if you want to break that generational, what do they say? I hate to say the word curse because I don't like that word, but just of what is happening in your...
We say generational patterns of poor health. That's
okay. Okay. If you want to break that, you have the power to look at what you're doing and how you can make different changes. But we need to be realistic too with our schedules and everyday life.
Yeah. And I think too, people don't realize it takes more time to go to a renal dialysis center 3 to 4 times a week.
Wow.
When you've lived years with uncontrolled diabetes. I mean, that takes a lot more time than meal prepping, let me tell you. And so I think part of it is people don't think that these things will happen to them until they happen to them. And then Cersei and I were talking the other day, your health goes from like number 8 or 9 on the list of important things in your life to the first thing. It goes straight to the top when you run into like a health event or health situation. I think unfortunately, sometimes people wait until that happens before they actually take action, because it doesn't have to be gradual. You can choose to make an abrupt lifestyle change. I think it comes down to, that awareness of yourself and what limiting beliefs, what's the record player playing in your head. The one I had was, when I first learned about whole food plant-based eating, was I couldn't live without my cheese. I loved to go for sushi, so I was always eating sushi. And so I had these limiting beliefs that I literally couldn't live without these certain foods. But that's all it was. It wasn't truth. It wasn't reality. It was just the record that I had playing in my head for a while. And I think that, and everybody's going to make a different choice, but I do appreciate when someone can share all the information with me, even though I might not act upon it right away. Just having that seed planted will help, I think, to bear fruit later, if it doesn't right away.
That's right. And you could even have a check-in. I would have patients follow up to check in and say, how are you doing? Well, it was a horrible week. That's okay. There's always tomorrow. We move forward. So having some accountability with someone helps as well too. And just exploring, having different palettes, different menus introduced to you. There's a lot that you could do with plant-based. You'd be surprised, just even maybe just having some beans and rice. You'd be like, oh, this is nice, I didn't even know this would taste this good, or I could have that. What I would do with my patients too, if they were struggling, especially with their cholesterol and saturated fat, I would do like a meatless Monday. So on Mondays, we're going to have no meat products. We're going to do a vegetarian or vegan. So they slowly get the idea and the concept, and just writing things down. I think when you write things down on paper, on your planner, we have our phones, you can even put it in your phone. It helps us stick to a plan so we can get into a repetitious motion eventually.
Yeah, I'm going to just pivot a little bit. One of the things that we can look at Black women in general is the stress in society. And I think as Black women, we have an extra layer of, the world is a stressful place in general, but I think as Black women, we have an extra layer of stress in terms of inequality, discrimination, and all of those other things. One of the things that Gigi and I talk a lot about, what we find is a barrier with the women when it comes to eating healthy, and I'm just trying to put this in the context of Black women and stress and all of that, is this idea of emotional eating. And a lot of times when we are under stress, when we are trying to cope with life, food becomes an outlet. Can you talk about, the role that emotional eating plays into our addiction to food, and why it is so difficult to create that break free and really eat healthy when we're using it for emotional reasons to kind of help us to survive, so to speak. And so when we say eat healthy, what our mind is saying, well, how am I going to cope? So talk about emotional eating, talk about ways that we can move away from that as Black women, and even the spiritual piece. And, we talk a lot about this idea of meeting our needs with God instead of food. So if you could just kind of talk on that.
That's an interesting area to bring up. First of all, we're not represented very little in the literature when it comes to emotional eating, binge eating, or so forth. We're just not in the studies. So a part of that could be attributing to our weight gain and obesity, but we just don't know because we're not a part of the studies. But it's real, like you said, it's real. There's a lot of factors that Black women have to deal with. The stress. So, this is my outlet, this food I'm going to eat, this is going to make me feel better. And it's challenging, but how do we know unless we're able to have the individual come forth and we speak about it, or we could detect it, hopefully, in our practitioner visits where we go. But sometimes it can be overlooked because it's very much real. And then when, in terms of, spirituality, if you're just stressed and this is your way to cope, it's a struggle. It's a struggle that women deal with, and we have to be we have to be sensitive with that to encourage them and not to make them feel any less, because you're going to do what you can to make your emotions feel good, to release that pain. And that's why it takes a team approach, because when you're working with those that have eating disorders, you're working with a registered dietitian nutritionist, you're a social worker, you're a psychologist, you're a nurse practitioner. It's a whole team approach. But unfortunately, we are missed a lot in the literature because we're just not there. That's why researching Black women and women of color is very important to me. I'm very passionate because we need to know what's going on with us, and we need to hear from the women of how they feel and what they would like to be seen, so we can make culturally relevant interventions to help them and the community to better themselves and their family.
Yeah, so we gotta get some money together, fund your studies, because yeah, I mean, it's true though. I mean, there's not a lot in the literature. I mean, pretty much what we know is that I think it's 80% of Black women have overweight or obesity. And then there's obviously the chronic illnesses that, result from the obesity. And beyond that, there's not much available. That's a real injustice. Do you see, I mean, now I'm really going off on a tangent. Do you see that climate or that changing at all? Like, is there an interest in it? Just generally in terms of doing more studies, looking at Black women? And I don't want to get too political, but
we'll be careful, right?
I know.
There is interest because, as I mentioned before, how we target Black women, we have the studies at the church because we know that's where they will come. So the church is a key factor into bringing these women in, but we have to bring them in, and there has to be some type of trust that they're going to be able to express how they feel. Mm-hmm. So that's an important thing of bringing down these barriers. There is interest, but I still think there's not enough. Yeah. There's not enough. It starts from when we see our primary care providers. Mm-hmm. And many of them are asking about the social determinants of health too, but where do they go with that? Do we just drop it? Okay, well, let me give you some medication or do this or that. Are we referring out mm-hmm. to counselors, to a dietitian, yeah. where it can be, so we can help these women. But I think trust really needs to be established.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of trust even in the healthcare. I mean, there's so many cases, so many studies of how Black women get discriminated against, and people with obesity in general get discriminated against in the healthcare setting. There's, I think, a lot of studies on that, not necessarily looking at solutions necessarily. At least I haven't seen any. Maybe there are. But if you we even come across people through our program and whatnot who, are kind of like, well, I don't really want to go to the doctor. They just don't even want to go, and that's not necessarily good. And so, I think, I think there's a huge gap, in terms of service. In the healthcare system for Black women, and trust of our medical system. And this goes back to historical times. I'm sure you can speak to this just in terms of the experiments that have been conducted on Black women over the years. And it's all contributing to why things are the way they are.
Yeah, that's why resistance. They say, well, why don't you go to the doctor? Well, history has a huge part of it.
Yeah.
You think about the syphilis study that happened. It still resonates with us, even with the COVID vaccine. Many of us were resistant to get that, and rightly so, based on what has happened in the past. And I think people need to be sensitive and to understand that. of the research that has happened in the past.
Yeah, and I say that's all the more reason why lifestyle is so important. If you don't trust the healthcare system, you have to educate yourself on, eating a healthy diet, moving your body, because you want to stack the odds in your favor, to not have to rely on the healthcare system as much as you would otherwise if you didn't. And that's where this, I think, knowledge is power. This health literacy. Cersei and I are involved with Healthy Heart Nation. Who put on the HELP conference, and we had a meeting over the weekend about advancing health literacy. And I think that mission is so important, because if you have, if you have a segment of the population, Black women specifically, and I would just say African Americans in general, having a mistrust of the healthcare system, you have to arm them with, okay, well, these are the healthy behaviors that you can adopt to reduce your risk of needing to go in. Not that you can eliminate the healthcare system altogether, but if you can avoid high blood pressure, if you can avoid or prevent type 2 diabetes, if you can avoid or prevent, cancer, certain cancers that, we know are linked to obesity, you're going to really stack those odds in your favor of needing to rely on the healthcare system. I mean, I think the healthcare system back in the day was really set up to handle acute care. Hey, I've fallen off my skateboard and I broke my wrist, go in and get it patched up. But over the years, over the decades, as the obesity rates have gone up and chronic diseases in general, the shift has moved to where, like, I think 80 or 90% of our healthcare dollars are spent on preventable chronic diseases. And so you want to do those preventative measures. And so, I think that's another reason to really, push past the uncomfortability of not eating those foods that are going to cause the disease and eat foods that are going to promote the health.
And when people are able to go to a health provider that they can relate to or looks like them,
true,
a lot of times you'll see great progress.
Yeah, well, you won't see the discrimination, for sure. And the more to which we could educate physicians on, and I know it's a lot different today than it was 10 years ago because of the work of Healthy Heart Nation, Plantrition Project, American College of Lifestyle Medicine, of educating physicians on preventative medicine and food as medicine. I think those conversations can be very productive as well. So if you pair, a physician that looks like you with a physician that's also trained in lifestyle medicine, you got a great situation going on right there.
Yeah, for sure. But I think I was reading a study and they were saying it was less than 2% of Black physicians overall. And so we're in a numbers game as well.
Yeah.
So, the reality of me having a Black doctor or the majority of us having a Black doctor is not the reality yet, not yet. Mm-hmm. And maybe for the future generations, as we're now seeing more Black doctors, it will produce more children to want to be I know it's a trickling effect, but as it stands, and when you guys were just talking about the discrimination, there's so many studies from infant mortality, from women in pregnancy. I can speak for myself. I'm not going to go down that road though, but all of those things on every key point that women experience that discrimination. And I remember when the whole discrimination thing came out with Serena Williams, and that's where you were just like, okay, if you got all the money and you got all the fame and you are still showing that, it really just highlighted the discrimination that is there, because you would think that fame and money would trump that type of situation, but in that case it didn't. And so there's a lot of work to be done. And I think, like you said, Dr. Joseph, we need more people studying Black women. We need more people who are interested in seeing, like you said, what is going on with us. So thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about the next generation. Do you have any study? I know we talk a lot that there's this big boom on childhood obesity. Is there any numbers for how that looks like for Black girls and where that is heading for them? Is there any data there?
I don't have data specifically for Black girls, but if we're in the trend that we are now, we can imagine those numbers are just only going to get higher. But if we can focus on making ourselves healthier and what we need to do to take control of our family, we can be role models to our children, our Black little girls as they grow up, so they can feel confident in who they are. When they look in the mirror, they can be happy with who they see and not wanting to necessarily choose to look like someone else that they see in the magazine or on TV. But it all starts to stem from home. So if we can target the parents, making us Black women and women of color strong and confident in who we are, changing our lifestyle patterns, so we can have the next generation to be healthy.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Dr. Joseph. Yeah, I've had people say, "Well, you and Cersei need to do more stuff with kids," and I'm like, "Well, it's not going to stick if the parents are still, buying the food and doing the behaviors. I mean, yeah, it's nice to do something with kids, but that I'm not going to do more with kids because I don't think it's going to be very effective if the parents aren't changing." So it's kind of like, it's almost, I don't know, sometimes I feel like people are just trying to like give us busy work to do because they don't want to deal with it. So, I don't mean to be cynical about it, but it's like,
I think, yeah, it's definitely a family affair, because at the end of the day, children are not really in control of what goes on the table. I've had situations where, there's some parents that would yield to the child. They come home and they say, "Mom, I don't want to eat this anymore," and all this other stuff. And the parent kind of accommodates it, but that's the exception to the rule. Yeah. More time that it's the parents that are giving the food, creating the food environment, modeling what is healthy, modeling, are you putting them in sports? Are you like, they don't really have that much control. Maybe if they're teenagers, like older teenagers on the verge of going to college, that might shift a little bit. They have a little more autonomy. But if you're talking about little kids, I mean, they're really at the mercy of the family structure. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right, Dr. Joseph, to talk about how can we approach revolutionizing the family structure, the family dynamic around health, because that's not only going to change the Black women's health, it's going to change the children. It's going to even change the grandparents who are now witnessing a change that they never saw, and it's going to go there, and it's going to affect relationship because maybe the female is the one who cooks and now the male is getting healthier. We had women who were doing the boot camp with us in the Daniel fast, and they were just doing this for themselves, but they're cooking the dinner. And she put a testimony that her husband's cholesterol went down. Why? Mm-hmm. Because she was the cook. She wasn't bringing him into this boot camp, but as a residual effect of just saying, "Hey, this is what we're eating for this week," and he's just eating, he's just eating what's putting on the table, his health changed. And so we see the power of the Black woman in a family structure because she's feeding the children, she's feeding the spouse. She is also being a role model for the extended family, for the grandparents, for the aunts, for the cousins, and it's an impact that we can't even see the trickling effects that starts with a Black woman, but will end in so many places that we can't imagine.
That's why it's so important for us to support one another, to have a support, because we don't know what we're going through. We just need to support and love one another. Come together.
Yeah, cry on each other's shoulders,
Yes.
Wrap arms virtually.
Yeah. And I think that's creating the space because, Dr. Joseph, you talked about when you brought them in to do the BMI and all the tests. You just saw them starting to congregate.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing, you created a place for them to come. And I think that's the call to all of us who are out there. This is what Gigi and I are so passionate about, creating this Healthy for My Purpose space. We just need to create the space and they will come. We just need to create the safety in the churches and they will come. And so it's not, we are naturally communal, like you said, but once you created the space, they just gather naturally. So it's not something like we have to pull the teeth. We just have to create the space.
And hopefully we'll see that rippling effect, because even when I was doing my study, there were a few participants that called their friend, oh, so-and-so, why don't you come and do this? So they were able to come in because they were so excited about it. They want the knowledge and information. So there's a lot more that needs to be done. And I plan on doing more research.
Well, thank you, Dr. Joseph, so much for your time, for this conversation. It is such an important topic, and I'm hoping that through your work, more research gets done to look into what is going on with Black women and their health. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and the benefits that you're going to be adding to the community at large.
Well, I just wanted to thank you both for having me on your podcast, just to bring awareness. I appreciate the work that you all are doing, just fantastic. I think it's phenomenal what you're doing. And hopefully to people, someone that's listening out there, my words would just be to love yourself, be confident in who you are. If you need help, seek the help that you need. And remember, one step at a time. Lifestyle changes, you'll get there, but don't get discouraged.
Indeed. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on the Healthy for My Purpose podcast. We hope you enjoyed the community and are walking away empowered and encouraged to live your healthiest life for your God-ordained purpose. You can connect with us on Facebook and Instagram to enjoy fellowship with like-minded women. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this on iTunes. Until we meet again, keep honoring your body for your purpose. Want to lose weight? Comment yes, and we'll send you our free masterclass.